Hello everyone, my name is Sam and welcome to Vienna. In this video, I'm going to answer a question that was posed to me on a previous video by Simon. He asked for an in-depth look at how to set up the data link in the Airbus A320 family in X-Plane, particularly so that you can get flight plans and wind data into the aircraft easily without having to program it yourself. So I thought long and hard about how best to cover this, and I could just briefly show the setup in the aircraft and how you load through the air traffic services unit your flight plan and wind data and be done. And that would be a very short video. But I decided what might be more useful is just to go through the whole process of setting up a flight and include everything that happens prior to jumping in the sim, as well as all the steps in the sim themselves. So that is the plan. Now, because of this, I'm probably going to be jumping around quite a bit between the iPad that I have in front of me, as well as the simulator and the aircraft. And that is for reasons that I'll explain for a moment. However, because of this, it's likely that this video will be a bit longer than I probably want or anticipate. I will split each section up with chapters, so you'll be able to jump around to any specific area that is of interest to you. And this video will focus on X-Plane and the Toliss A321. However, this will work with any of the Toliss Airbuses that support integration with SimBrief. There are other aircraft in both X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator that also support various levels of integration, and if you want a video on those, then please leave a comment below. So before we do anything, we actually need to verify that our aircraft is configured and ready to integrate with SimBrief. And to do that, you go into the ISCS, or the Interactive Simulation Control System. I have this bound to a hotkey, which is why it just appeared. And within there, in the sound and add-on accounts section, you will see, obviously, the sound settings for the aircraft, but more importantly, account IDs. And in here, you can add your SimBrief ID. Now, be aware this is not your username in SimBrief, it's actually your numeric ID. And if you don't know where to get that, you can find it in SimBrief under your account settings. So if you go down to account settings and select, in there, you'll see on the second panel down, in the section called Your SimBrief Data, the first item is your pilot ID, which is usually a numeric number. I'd be surprised if it wasn't. So that number is what goes in this ID box. Now, the options underneath are important. I'll quickly talk about them. So ignore aircraft type mismatch. What this means is if the aircraft registration in SimBrief doesn't exactly match what's configured here in X-Plane, if this is set to be off, then the air traffic services unit will reject the data coming from SimBrief. Now, ideally, this would be off because in a aspirational state, everything would align. But unfortunately, a lot of liveries that are created for the Toliss aircraft don't necessarily update all of the various registrations and IDs for the aircraft. And even though you'll see one registration on the outside, it will actually think it's a different one, and you'll even have a different registration in the cockpit. It's a bit of a pain and something to navigate. I generally find that reputable and high quality livery painters for this aircraft do a great job, but there's a lot of less consistent paints, and in those cases you'll find sometimes you get a mismatch. So I leave this on as a safety. It just prevents annoyance when you're trying to get flying. You can turn it off, but you might find that you have issues pulling in your flight plan information. The next one down is set payload and fuel to SimBrief. I have this on as a convenience. It just helps speed things along. Of course, in real life, the payload and fuel is coming from your company. You as a pilot aren't doing this. You just get a sheet once it's completed fueling and everyone's on board that gives you your weights and your fuel load, and you sign that off. So this basically simulates that. It sets the aircraft up as you planned in SimBrief, and all you need to do is verify that with your briefing. And then the last one is always use SimBrief wins. If you don't have this on, then any win data that you try and pull will come from the sim. In X-Plane 12, because all of the wins is coming from a weather service, which is based on real-world data, and SimBrief is using real-world data, I just use the SimBrief ones for consistency because it's effectively like the company giving you the wins rather than you relying on the simulator. If you are not flying in real time and you're using historic weather conditions, it's probably best to turn this off and use the Sim's wind data. Below that is Hoppy CPDLC logon, and if you don't know what CPDLC is, then I will let you go off and research that on your own. And Hoppy is a service that supports CPDLC. We won't be covering this in this video. If you'd like to know more about the functions of the controller pilot data link communication service, then again, leave a comment below and maybe we'll cover it in a future video. At the bottom, very important, you can also pull ATIS through your air traffic services unit. You can choose between VATSIM and Pilot Edge as the ATIS data source. Best to set it to whichever network you're flying on. And right now we're connected to VATSIM, so we're set on VATSIM. If you change any of these settings, make sure you hit the save. That will save it for perpetuity, and make sure you don't have to do this again. And with that all set, you should be good to start the process. So, as you can see, we have an Air France A321 here on the stand at Vienna, and we are going to set up a flight that is happening in real life in about just under 5 hours actually, which is departing here in Vienna and flying to Paris Charles de Gaulle. And this will form the service of Air France 1139. So we are going to set up this flight. Now, to support us setting this up, we're going to be using a number of tools, and I'm going to go into which ones in a moment. But first, I briefly want to just step back and talk about real-world operations. How you choose to fly in the sim is, of course, completely up to you. And if you are the sort of person that enjoys just jumping in a plane, finding the nearest runway and blasting off and doing, flights to wherever and whatever, then that's fine. And in fact, that's great. And I've done that and it's fun. But at this point in my simming experience, I generally now try and simulate as much and as close as possible real-world operations. The scope of this video is largely going to focus on, as much as possible, trying to mimic what happens in the real world. However, I am a single pilot sitting here on my own, doing multiple tasks that are done by tens, if not hundreds of people in a full-blown airline operation. And so we have to be mindful of that. And because of that, we're going to be using some tools that helps us scale ourselves effectively across the multitude of roles that goes into getting any flight on any given day from the origin to its destination. So what tools we're going to use? Well, the main ones I use are FlightAware, which is a free service that allows you to look up any flight in the world, both happening now, in the future, or historically. We'll be using SimBrief, which has effectively become the de facto dispatching system for flight sim. and we're going to be using some SimBrief templates that are coming from the community to help us configure the aircraft. So before we jump in the aircraft, and actually as is with real life, a lot of activity is going to happen getting the flight ready. All airlines will have an operations center, and those operations centers will have dispatchers that plan and set up flight briefings for every flight a given company is doing on any given day. And this will happen many hours before the flight is due to take off. Now, of course, the airline will know pretty much how many passengers they're due to carry, give or take a few, and therefore they'll have a good sense of what the weight, at least without the fuel, will be. They will also know roughly what the weather is going to be. Within 12 hours of the flight, they'll have a reasonably accurate forecast of the weather. And therefore, with those two bits of information, they can largely predict what the aircraft will need in order to satisfy the mission. So the dispatching team will start to get a flight plan and briefing together for the pilots, which takes all of this into consideration. And the briefing ultimately will include the payload that you're carrying, the amount of fuel you need, both to satisfy the mission as well as any alternates or other factors, and also include data for the weather and wind, both at your destination as well as where you are departing from, and of course the en route winds in the cruise. All of these factors go through various algorithms that airlines have to calculate other things, and I'm not going to go too much in detail, but you may hear and see terms banded around cost index, and this is a specific number that airlines use to basically control the fuel factors and speed that you're going to fly at, and basically how inefficient you're going to be in order to maintain a schedule. The higher the cost index, the more important it is the flight maintains a schedule, and that could mean a higher fuel burn. I don't want to go into it in too much detail, it's quite a nuanced subject, but when you see cost index, it's basically the culmination of many factors coming down to how important a schedule is for a given flight. So we have our flight Air France 1139 between here in Vienna and Paris Charles de Gaulle. The flight is due to depart at 12:10 Central European Time, which will be 11:10 a.m. UTC. So let's start getting things set up. So first, I'm going to be using my iPad to get the flight prepared before we do anything in the sim, so you can see what's going on the iPad here. And first of all, you can see the homepage for SimBrief. This is in a logged in state. SimBrief is a dispatch service that you can use to plan flights, and it's very much become a staple of flight sim, and it's pretty much the de facto service at this point. You don't have to use SimBrief to create flight plans and figure out your load and fuel, but SimBrief effectively simulates what an operations center does at an airline. It's going to factor in your load, your wind, and any other components that are important to you, such as schedule. Now, SimBrief has a great feature that I use a lot, and I highly recommend that you do this as well for every aircraft that you fly, and that is the ability to save every airframe in its system, and with that you can set a number of preferences. Now, this aircraft here, which is the Air France A321 Foxtrot Golf Tango Alpha Tango, isn't actually in SimBrief yet, so we're going to have to add it in before we can start planning our flight. So if we go to the SimBrief menu and go to saved airframes, actually I'll just verify it's not in here. So Foxtrot Golf Alpha Tango Alpha. Yes, we don't have it. So you get to see this. Now you can just hit new airframe, choose an Airbus A321 here, select that. There's sometimes preset ones from previous aircraft you may have added, and you can go in here and create an aircraft And as you can see, there's a lot of data to fill out, and good luck to you getting the right numbers in place. It is possible, but why do all that hard work? So instead of this, on the X-Plane forums, there is actually a set of templates for saved airframes in SimBrief, and I'll leave a link in the description below for where you can find this. But it means that we can actually go and add a lot of this information directly from the template, and then all we have to do is update things like the registration, the SALCAL code if applicable, and a few other bits of data, and know that everything else, such as the weights and fuel capacity, are already set. So, to make sure we get the right variant, I'm going to quickly hop into the cockpit and make sure that we are looking at the right unit. So if we look in the cockpit here and we look down, we'll see on the MCDU we have some important information. On the very top row we have the variant, which is the Airbus A321-211, which is useful. And if we look on SimBrief templates, that means that we are definitely the variant with the CFM56 engines, and that is confirmed on the next line down with the engine statement. So that's one bit of information we need. The second bit of information we need is how many fuel tanks we have. So if we go into the ECAM and select fuel, here we can see our fuel systems of the aircraft, and the main tanks are across the wings and the center wing box. However, you can see down here we have 2 additional boxes, and each one of these is an additional center tank for fuel, or ACT. And so we can see 2 boxes, and that means that we have 2 additional ACTs on this aircraft. So looking back at the SimBrief template, the third variant of the A321-211 with 2 ACTs is the template we need for this particular aircraft. So if we go back outside for a second, because we aren't meant to be in the cockpit yet, we can go and set up our aircraft. So we have selected the A321 with the correct variant with 2 additional fuel tanks. First thing that we need to update is the registration. So it's Foxtrot Golf Alpha Tango Alpha. I believe I wrote it down. It's Golf Tango Alpha Tango. And if you want to verify that, the easiest way is to look on the outside of the aircraft. And there we go. Foxtrot Golf Tango Alpha Tango. We'll just leave the camera there for a second. So going back to our SimBrief profile, we can also see, if we look down at the nose gear, you can see 2 letters on the door of the front nose gear, and that is our fin number. So we can put Alpha Tango because that is the fin number. Next is the SALCAL, and we can actually jump back in the cockpit for this, and we can see this aircraft has a SALCAL of Echo Kilo Bravo Foxtrot. Let's reset our position again. Let's just go back out. There we go. We're not meant to be on the aircraft yet. Okay, we're doing good. Our airframe information is coming together. Now we are going to set up some preferences for this aircraft. These are purely for SimBrief, and you don't have to do it, but I do it just because it saves a lot of time later. So our OFP, or the flight plan layout we want to use, can be anything you want. You can use the default, which is the Lufthansa format, Lido, or you can use any number of different airline operators format. We are Air France, and as you can see, there's an Air France. There's actually 2 variants of Air France. There's a 2012 version and a 2017 version. We'll go with the latter. and that will be the layout for our flight plan briefing document. For flight rules, all Air France flights, certainly for me, are going to be IFR. Type of flight is scheduled almost always. Our planned units will be kilograms, as we're in Europe. And we are done with this row. Moving down, we can see the aircraft name is correct. It's the 321-211. We have the correct engine type of CFM 56 5 Bravo 3. In the comments section, this is purely for you, and I recommend strongly to put a meaningful name here in the comments, as it will show up next to the aircraft when you're making your plan. So to help me identify this, I'm going to put Air France. And that will help me identify this as the correct aircraft. That's it, we're done with the airframe info, and just to help ourselves, we'll hit save airframe at this point. Now we're not quite done, we need to check a few other things. So the airframe weights, everything in this section will have been completed by the template. You can verify and cross-check, but we shouldn't actually have to do anything here. Similarly, airframe equipment has been pre-filled by all of the template. One thing you can update, if you so choose, is the ETOPS certification. This aircraft doesn't do extended operations over water, so we don't need to worry about ETOPS. For fuel planning, this allows you to configure any standard settings that you always want to apply with your fuel. So if you wanted to change, for example, what your default contingency or reserve settings were, you could set them here. And this would apply to every flight plan by default that you created for this aircraft. It's completely up to you whether you do this. I generally leave it alone because usually circumstances change enough and frequently enough that I'm basically adding manual information as required and needed. So moving down, airframe text entries, this gets added to your briefing document from the dispatcher. This can be anything you want. If you want to remind yourself that, you know, there's some strange behavior of this aircraft, for example, you can put it in here and it will always appear in the flight plan. I'm not going to add anything in this instance. And then lastly, we have the airframe performance box, and again, everything here has been added automatically by the template. However, the one box I want you to pay attention to is the default cost index. So here we are, we're at this magic number that airlines use. If you have auto, then SimBrief is going to create this number for you always, and it's going to do it as an airline would based on a number of factors that are guiding what this number should be and how important your schedule is to maintain. I found SimBrief's calculation of this number highly annoying, to be frank, at times, where you'll get very low cost factors of 8 or similar, and that means that your cruise speed is generally very slow. I like to cruise roughly at what the aircraft design speed is, like really comfortable at, and the optimum of fuel efficiency. And so generally a cost index of around 20 or low 20s is good. And it's also, I'm told, at least by other pilots, that generally this is what you're going to get on most flights, unless the schedule is very, very important to maintain. So therefore, to save myself having to add this on every flight plan, I'm going to default our cost index to 22. And with that, we'll save our airframe, and now we have this aircraft in our SimBrief fleet. We're doing good, but we don't have our flight yet. So now we're going to switch over to our operations mode and start setting up our flight. So within SimBrief, we go to create new flight off the menu, and we're presented with the flight generation. Now we're going to have to provide some information. So we will start with the airline. We are Air France, so Alpha Foxtrot Romeo, and our flight number is 11, or 11, I should say, 3 and 9. And we are departing from Venice, which is Lima Oscar Whiskey. And we are flying to Paris Charles de Gaulle, which is Lima Foxtrot Papa Golf. So now we have our departure and arrival airport. We're going to leave the alternate alone for now. We may come back and change it in a bit. Our departure time we can set up. Now we said it was, we can actually look on FlightAware. It is due to depart at 12:10 CET, Central European Time. Central European Time is currently 1 hour ahead of UTC. All times inside of SimBrief are UTC. So because of that, we know that it's going to be 11:50 UTC. Be aware, obviously, times shift and change as daylight savings kick in the summer months, so keep that in mind. But all flight plans and airline operations are always bound in UTC. Okay, next, the aircraft type. Now, we are an Airbus A321, as we know, and this comes in two components. We first choose the type, and then we can choose a specific airframe from our fleet, or use a default. Now, of course, we've just spent all the work setting up our airframe for this aircraft, so we will use that. However, as soon as I choose an aircraft type, you're going to see a flight plan be generated, because it's going to use the default for the Airbus A321. So as we select it, you'll see default is selected, and now we have a route already loaded. However, we don't want the default, we want our Air France A321, and we can see it third in the list here. Now you see where we have the aircraft registration, Foxtrot Golf Tango Alpha Tango, and then dash Air France. That Air France was our comment that we added. If we didn't add that Air France in there, it would just be Foxtrot Golf Tango Alpha Tango. Now, given it's a French registration, probably easy to guess it would be an Air France aircraft, but once you start building up a big fleet, it's very useful. You can see an example of where I didn't do this earlier on the Airbus A321 November 321 Sierra Bravo. So that's actually going to be hard for me to figure out. I know it's a US registration, and given the Sierra Bravo, who could that be? Anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked, but this is the reason why it's important to put a comment in. So let's select our aircraft, and now you can see a few things have changed. Particularly the cost index is set to our preset 22, which is exactly what we want. The correct registration's in place, the FIN number's in place, and our SALCAL's in place. So we are already saving ourselves a lot of time and effort by having this frame in our SimBrief database. This is very similar, of course, to what real airline operations will be doing. So moving down, additionally, based on our saved information for the airframe, we have our OFP layout set, we have our units set correctly, it knows it's an IFR flight, it knows it's scheduled, and we can control certain other selections. Now, given this is across land, and there are plenty of airports in Europe for us to use if anything should occur, we can turn off ETOPS planning. The flight is short enough that we probably don't need any step climbs, so we'll turn those off. Runway analysis is useful, but be careful. Also, I'll save with that. And we can include our NOTAMs and any FIR NOTAMs as well. And that should be done for the selection section. Lastly, in this section, we can have some optional entries, which basically controls what our block time should be. If you change that block time to be lower and you don't have an automatic, and you have an automatic cost index, that's how you can control what that number is. It's also suggesting some runways. It's going to auto suggest our cruising altitude. It's also going to suggest what our passengers can be, but you can override. You could say full, or you could type in a number. So let's just say there are 200 passengers on this flight. We're not going to carry any freight. We'll leave payload automatic and 0 fuel weight. We'll let it calculate for us based on this load. We can now control fuel planning, and this is useful especially for when you are flying in events like across the pond. You probably want to take more fuel if you are flying the event, just in case you are howled over an airport. I've certainly found myself circling over Heathrow for at least 30 minutes, so make sure you add the extra fuel in those circumstances. Moving down, we get into the routing. So as you can see, we already have a route, and SimBrief has done its best to try and do the most optimal route given where we're flying to and, or rather from and to, I should say. And it actually gets a variety of routes from real world data. So it's hard to see, but on the suggested routes area, there's a little tab on the right, and that tab is showing the data source. So a lot of these are coming from SimBrief itself, but this top one is actually a real route as flown by an aircraft recently. Funny enough, all of these are the same, but sometimes you'll find them vary depending on the source. SimBrief sources its routes from a variety of sources, and you can see them here: AutoRouter, SkyVector, Route Finder, FlightAware, which is what we were just using, and others. So these are real-world routes, and you can use those. In the US, pretty much every flight that FlightAware will track that's an IFR flight, you can actually get the flight plan. However, it doesn't usually pick them up for you. If none of these routes suit your needs, you can try and create one yourself within SimBrief. You can also create one in SkyVector or any other flight planning tool and just copy it in here. So there's a lot of flexibility. However, we're going to use the route that's given. I think this is pretty much what every aircraft will be flying today, and which is why you see it consistently being the same. Next up is alternate airports. It's given us one in France. In this case, I'll just go with the default, but in real world operations, the alternate airport is going to be chosen very carefully. Generally, they're going to try and take you to one that has at least services or support in agreement with the airline. Alternates is a big other topic that is too much detail for this video. However, there's some good content out there already on YouTube if you're interested in how to select an alternate. Historical weather we don't need because we're using real world weather. So this will use the default SimBrief weather. However, if you want a different source, you can actually add your own source for weather here, and it will get added into your flight plan and get loaded into the aircraft. And that's it. With all of this information, we are ready to generate our briefing. So we hit the generate flight button and SimBrief gets busy. And as soon as this is done, we are ready to start loading the flight into our aircraft. Now, before we do this, as a habit, I always pre-file the flight. So in this case, we're going to pre-file on to VATSIM. So that's the network we are connected to. Really? And as usual, SimBrief will pre-fill everything, and we can hit file. And there we go, our flight plan is filed. We can close that window. Now from here, we can leave SimBrief open or close it, but everything we're going to need is going to be in the aircraft itself at this point. So, our back office is done. Our airline operations service have set up our flight and built the flight plan, and they have now got everything ready from briefing and fuel and load ready for the pilots. So at this point, the pilots will turn up at the airport a couple of hours before the flight is due to depart, and they will pick up a huge stack of this briefing documentation, either in paper form or through their electronic flight bags. I think most airlines are trying to reduce the amount of paper they use now, and start reviewing that information. And we can see what a pilot would see within SimBrief, as it will generate effectively the flight briefing. So it's saying hello in French, hello everyone, and it's giving us all of the briefing information. So we can see what our passenger weight will be, what our total payload is, an estimated fuel weight of 67 tons, or about 68 tons when you round it up. And we can see some of the limitations of what we're carrying. So we're actually only going to burn about 7.5 tons of fuel. There we get the full summary. So actually we're only going to burn about 4.5 tons. So we're going to take 7.5 tons of fuel, but we'll use about 4.2 tons. In here we get our routing, so we can see departing out of Vienna, runway 11, and flight level 360 will be our cruise altitude. Then we get the route itself, and then arrival in Paris on runway 27 right. And following that, we get the detailed flight plan, and within here we should see each waypoint, what altitude we're expected, and our actual fuel on board at that point, plus some weather information, wind information. And you can go down, you get the full briefing, you'll get your NOTAMs, you'll get your weather, all the information that a pilot's going to review. However, we're going to skip through this and just jump on board and start setting up the aircraft now. So imagine pilots have signed off on the initial flight briefing. They leave the office in the airport and start heading down to gate Charlie 42. They meet the gate agents and show their identification. They then get sent through the doors to the gate and down to the aircraft, where the aircraft is waiting, and set themselves up in the cockpit. And so here we are. We'll just get it to a state that most pilots would find it in. So here we are in the cockpit. And we have an aircraft that is not set up at all, which is what we now have to do. So now our company has finished all of the work it needs to do with setting up our flight plan and getting all of the fuel calculations and wind data together. We will receive that through the ACARS system on the aircraft. However, before we do that, we should get the aircraft into a state where we can really start setting up appropriately. So as would happen in the real world, we'll start with the overhead panel. I will actually turn the fuel pumps off for now, as we'll be refueling in a minute. Okay, starting on the left side, we need to get our IRSs aligned. So we will put this into status, look at system 1 and turn system 1 to nav. So IR1 is aligning. We wait for the battery light to go out, and then we can turn on 2 and 3. Oh, I was expecting a readout up here, but we're not getting it. Anyway, moving down. Our ADRs are set correctly, our flight controls look fine, our evac is set to captain, emergency electrical power is fine, GPWS is set correctly, fault light on trains expected. We'll do a cockpit voice recorder test, hold the button for 5, and release. Oxygen is fine, and we'll move up. Now we need to do our fire tests. APU, engine 1, and engine 2. Of course, in real life you'd be looking at the ECAM, checking the ECAM memo is reading out the correct instructions. Fire test complete. Hydraulic system is fine. Fuel pumps are currently set to off while we're refueling. We'll turn those on after refueling. Batteries, everything is above 25 volts and all looks good between battery 1 and 2. We're currently on external power. Air conditioning, temperatures are set as needed. We're on auto. Packs are folding as expected as they are not running. Lights, we have our navigation lights set to 1, otherwise everything else is set correctly. Emergency lights will set to arm and no smoking signs can go to on. Okay, top of the right hand side we have our third radio set to data. This is important. This is the data link for ACARS. Flight control computers are fine, and our cargo ventilation and temperatures are all set as needed. We can do a cargo smoke test. We're not actually carrying anything, but just for consistency. Cargo smoke test is complete. Okay. So our aircraft is starting to come alive. You can see our primary flight displays now are showing something a little more useful. Everything that we're going to do now is down on the FMC. Now, we should just take a note of the fact we currently have 3.5 tons of fuel on board, but we know we need to take about 7.6, 7.7 tons. That's going to happen automatically in a minute when we load our flight plan. So we'll just look back and check that happen, but I just wanted to call that out. So if we look down at our FMCs, on the left side I am going to put us on the initialization page, and on the right hand side we're going to go into the MCDU menu, select the Air Traffic Services Unit or ATSU, and in here we're going to go to the airline operations. Is it control? I can't remember if it's control communication. Aeronautical Operational Control, or AOC. So in here we can actually initialize our flight, and this is going to use our SimBrief ID to pull the latest flight plan that SimBrief has on your ID into the aircraft. So if we select init, we'll see flight plan data link in progress, and it's basically going off to the company and pulling our flight information in. And as you can see on the on the left hand side, we're now getting all of those boxes pre-filled. So we can verify we are currently in Vienna, which is Lima Oscar Whiskey Whiskey, and we are planning to fly to Paris, which is Lima Foxtrot Papa Golf for Charles de Gaulle. That all looks good. Our alternate is as set. It's I don't know where Oscar Kilo is in France, but it was what we had in our flight plan. Our flight number is Air France 1139. It's correct. Our cost index is 22. We're cruising at flight level 360, and it's even given us the temperature at cruise as well as the tropopause altitude as well. And here we have a notification to say that the performance data uplink is almost done, or also done, I should say, which is important later. We also have the confirmation that our aeronautical operational control flight plan has been uplinked. And we'll verify that in a minute. Now at this point we'll hit align IRS, as it knows now where we are and where we're going, and that will help our IRS system get set up, ready for the flight. If we go to the initialization page 2, we can also see that some information has been pre-filled as well, namely our zero fuel weight, our zero fuel CG, and our fuel, which is set to 7.6. And what you won't have seen, but has also happened, is our aircraft has been fueled. So there we can see the 7.6 tons. In addition, our aircraft has been loaded. So if we go to loading info, you can see there's the 200 passengers that we set in our flight plan. There's the fuel. And here we can see all of the information that we expect based on the above. So 67.8 tons, which we see there, and the zero fuel weight CG is also set. So through our SimBrief profile, we have now basically set up the aircraft ready for departure. Now we are on VATSIM, so in theory we could get the departure ATIS if it existed. Unfortunately, Vienna is not online and there's no ATIS available. There is another route, and you can pull the standard METAR through VATSIM, which I'm not going to do in this case, but just to know that it's in here. And as you can see, there's a variety of different airports based on our flight plan, and you can hit the METAR button. Actually, I might as well just do it as I'm here, and it's going to go and collect those. And in a second, yep, we'll see company message, so we'll hit receive messages, and there we can see all the relevant airports. And so if we hit Vienna, we can see the METAR right now, and this is coming from VATSIM, similar if you use the METAR command in VATSIM. And we can see we have winds of 1208 knots, clear skies, currently 0 Celsius with the dew point at -2, and QNH is 1036. No significant change expected. Okay, we'll exit out of this. Now, we will go back to our flight plan. And as you can see, even the flight plan has been loaded through our ACARS system. Except we do not have the departure runway or the SID, and we do not have the arrival runway or the star. In different parts of the world, things work differently, but all over the world, what is consistent is certainly at your departure airport, the runway is set by the controller, and the ATIS will give you that information. So, given we have no control currently on VATSIM, we'll go with the runway and SID that was planned. And that, as you can see from our briefing document, and I'll actually go down and show you, you can get your briefing document inside of SimBrief. We can bring up our flight plan here, and we can see the route summary for this flight. We are departing runway 11, and we are on the Medix 1 Alpha. There we are, Medi 1 Alpha. I think that's it. Oh no, Medi 1 Alpha. So good to check. There's no transition, and we can insert. There we are, and that is now set. Check, there's no discontinuities. All looks good. In Europe, generally, you don't get your arrival or runway until you are with your approach controller, or at least a controller near to your destination. Sometimes it will be in the ATIS, but in the US, you generally do fly the planned arrival as filed, so you can put that in, and probably the runway as well, although the runway that the airport is using for landing will always be in the ATIS. Side note, you'll see me just clearing out that GPS notice. One thing that I see a lot in flight sim videos and people streaming who aren't aware, you should always clear those messages as soon as you get them. Don't leave them there. Like, once you read the message and acknowledge it, get rid of it, because while it's there, it's blocking any further messages that you may need to see. So that's why I clear them straight away. Okay, we have our flight plan information in, but there's one piece missing, and this is the root of Simon's question. How do you get your wind in? Well, we have wind data now. As we saw in our flight plan, we have the wind for the entire trip, and we can pull it in. So, we go from the initialization page to wind, and then here we do wind request. And as we can see, the wind data has been uplinked from our SimBrief flight plan. So this is our departure wind, and if we go to next phase, we will see the wind at Gombe, and I will just verify that on our flight plan. There we are, 347, 17 or 18. Sometimes you'll see a slight discrepancy, but you know that is generally what I was expecting to see. Just a word on how you navigate this. As you can see, we can go through these each waypoint on our flight plan using the down key, and you can see a little index here at the bottom right of the screen. The down key allows us to traverse each one of our waypoints in the cruise because we're in cruise wind. If we go previous phase, that'll be our takeoff wind, and if we hit next phase here, we have our descent wind. Having our wind data is important because it helps us correctly calculate the time that it's going to take to complete the flight, as well as our estimated fuel on board on arrival. When you load the wind data, you see these numbers change, sometimes significantly depending on the wind conditions. This is critical, especially the longer the flight. If you're doing an event like cross the pond, it's almost essential that you have wind data in your flight plan and flight systems on your aircraft. I've seen many times where pilots have run out of fuel midway across the Atlantic because they didn't factor that in at the aircraft, and the headwinds changed from what they planned for, and then they ended up with burning more fuel. So certainly for across the pond and similar across the Pacific or any significant flight over a great distance, it gets more and more imperative your wind data is there. For shorter hops where you basically take off, you get up to cruise and you immediately descend, it's less critical, but it's always good practice to have it. In the real world, you're always going to load your wind data. Okay, well, as you can see, we are pretty much set up. We're not actually going to fly this flight right now, but there is one more thing I want to show you. So going back to the FMC, if we continue with the setup of the aircraft, at this point we would verify our flight plans. So actually we should do that. And I will get into our flight plan here. And on our navigation display, I'm going to switch it into plan mode. And what we're going to do is verify that our flight plan as here matches what is planned. Now in the real world, you'd actually go through each waypoint and check it off against what the company gave you to verify it's in. For time and ease in the sim, I just simplify this to verify that the flight plan goes from where we are departing from to our destination without any continuity issues or mismatch of waypoints. Sometimes waypoints get messed up and you'll find yourself heading in completely the wrong direction, sometimes by thousands of miles, so it's good to verify. Now as a cross-check, given the distance of the flight checks and the fuel required checks, we're probably okay, because if it was being messed up and we were being sent somewhere else by thousands of miles, those numbers wouldn't align. However, it's always good to verify. So we're expecting to depart from Vienna and largely take a westerly, northwesterly heading all the way across Germany into Belgium, and then we'll go westerly and then westerly, southwesterly. So we can verify that just by stepping through each waypoint, making sure that that tracks as expected. In the real world, you'd be calling off each waypoint and cross-referencing the actual flight plan. However, we don't need to worry about that in the sim for right now, as long as we're roughly heading in the right direction. And as you can see, the continuity we have is expected. That is just the end of the planned flight plan before our arrival into Paris. But we can see Paris already at the end here, just outside 80 miles from our final waypoint. So I'm confident this flight plan is going to take us as planned in the right direction. With that, we can set our navigation display back to ARC, which is what we'll be using for the flight itself. And then we can talk about the last bit of setup we need to do, which is our performance for takeoff. So we've already got the weather. We haven't set up our QNH yet, but we'll get to that. However, we need to set up our departure. So generally this aircraft knows where it is and knows what the transition altitude will be. However, you should verify that on the charts. I happen to know that 10,000 or 10,000 feet is the correct transition altitude for Vienna. However, the rest of these boxes in the past have been something that I'd fill in using the Toliss ISCS system. So in here, you can actually get what speeds you should put into your takeoff performance by selecting what flap configuration and using the flight plan runway and your other settings. It will give you the performance data, and then you can use this and copy it into here, which is fine, although it does rather ruin your immersion. In the real world now, you can actually get your performance data from your company via ACARS, and wonderfully this aircraft simulates that. So within the takeoff pane, you see at the bottom left here, we have a line select key for uplink takeoff data, and this is how we pull our takeoff data from the company. So our company knows what our takeoff weight is going to be, as well as our CG. They know what runway we're planning, and they know what the weather is roughly. With that, we can send this information to the company as a takeoff data request. So we hit that button and wait a few minutes, or seconds I should say. Doesn't take that long. Basically, once the star comes back, we should get also a message to say that we've got takeoff data. There we are, takeoff data uplink. So we can clear that message and go into our received data. And here we are. So we have some performance data, and this performance data is set for a full throttle takeoff go around setting, and with that we have a V1 speed of 146 knots, as well as a rotation, and then V2 at 150, and our flaps will be 1, and we'll have a trim of up 0.1. There's some additional information that we could have if we had takeoff shift. We could get different settings here. However, we like our engines. We don't want to overstress our engines, so generally we want to do a flex takeoff. And if one is available, we can actually select flex takeoff here, and we'll see now we have a flex of 57 degrees of V1, V rotate, and V2 speeds have changed. However, our flaps and trim actually stay the same in this regard. Given this, we'll take this particular performance because this works for us. So to use it, we just hit the insert uplink button, and now all of our performance data for takeoff has been pre-filled. And with that, we are basically ready to go. So there you have it. That is how I get my aircraft from flight plan to prepared and ready for takeoff. What we've seen here is effectively what happens in the real world condensed into something that works for a single person rather than a whole team of people, getting a flight prepared, planned, dispatched, and then the aircraft set up itself. This is about as much as we can simulate. I hope, Simon, this has answered your question. Thanks very much for posing it. If you'd like to see more information about anything that you've seen in this video, then please leave a question or comment below, and I'll either answer in the comments, or maybe there's another video based on whatever your question is. I hope you found this useful. If so, please hit the like button. If you want to see similar content to this, then hit subscribe. I try and post regularly. I hope everyone has a wonderful day and week, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.